Ukrainian lieutenant general, I believe, who has pretty much said something similar to that, meaning that that Ukraine is not in a position to begin this much vaunted counteroffensive until they receive more equipment, more material. He didn't give the figure of 6 times. I think that's Melnick's own personal calculations based upon the realities of the battlefield. Which, because normally you want a 3-to-1 advantage if you're going to be carrying out an attack of this nature, but I think what he's saying with the 6 times is in order to pin down the Russians on the totality of the line of contact to prevent reinforcements, etc. Ukraine's going to need 6 times as many resources as it currently has.
What are the respective force strengths now? Yeah, numerically.
Well, I mean, the Russians are probably hovering around 500, 600,000, and the Ukrainians are probably in the area of 600,000. But again, Ukrainian troops, the vast majority of them are poorly trained territorials, and all of the Russians are well-trained, well-equipped, well-rested.
Our Alistair Crook tells us that he is hearing that the Ukrainians are bringing trainees, 4 weeks of training, 16 and 17-year-olds, to the front at night in the dark, telling them to go to sleep. And when they wake up, they can see the Russian guns, and they run away. Well, you obviously can't. If that's true, you can't run a military like that.
No, you can't. Look, the fact of the matter is Ukraine had an army, an active regular force of 260,000 when this war began. And 80% of those original 260,000 well-trained, well-equipped, well-led forces, 80% are killed, captured, or wounded. They're gone. And they're not being replaced with troops anywhere near the same level of training. And in addition to that, Ukraine has had to, mobilize territorial brigades, reserve units, and these units are being eviscerated at the front line. It's not a survivable situation for these Ukrainian troops. It's tragic. I think Colonel McGregor, our mutual friend and a man I deeply respect, said it is transitioned away from, and I might be paraphrasing him, but it's transitioned away from a slaughter to literally a humanitarian disaster. That you can't even call this war anymore. What's going on there? It's just tragic what's going on, because Ukrainians can't defend against what the Russians are putting up against.
So President Zelensky's wanted spring offensive. It's not going to happen.
It can't happen. I mean, they may try something. They have assembled some forces, a lot of political pressure on them, especially from the British, to be seen as doing something in order to be able to convince Europe to continue putting resources into this. But they've lost all their air defense on the front lines. They have nothing. So,
right,
they used to be able to assemble forces under the cover of air defense and then bring those forces to the front lines. Now, as they assemble them 15, 20 kilometers back, the Russians detect it, and the Russians are hitting them with, 1,000, 1,500 pound bombs, precision guided bombs right in the middle of the assembly area. And these forces are being murdered before they even get a chance to, get near the front lines.
Just as we were coming on air, Secretary General Stoltenberg issued a statement. We have the translation. Here it is. More than 98% of the combat vehicles promised to Ukraine have already been delivered. That means over 1,500 armored vehicles, 230 tanks, and other equipment, including vast amounts of ammunition. What the heck do they have left?
Well, I mean, this stuff has been delivered. I think we should point out that many of the Leopard tanks that have been delivered can't go to the front lines because they broke down as soon as they arrived. They're now being stored in the rear with, to be used as spare parts to cannibalize them, to get some of the ones that were delivered ready to roll. It's not just equipment, though. You have to talk about the people who operate them. Have they been sufficiently trained? And the fact of the matter is, this stuff isn't going to survive. Most of it has already been destroyed. I mean, he can say it's been delivered. What he didn't talk about is the warehouses where these are put in. The Russians are blowing up. A lot of this equipment is destroyed before it even gets anywhere near the front line.
All right. So how dire is the tactical situation for the Ukrainian military. Now, you have told us before you answer, they have a general who is respected worldwide in the military, but he's only as good as the people that work for him. But how dire is their situation?
It's extraordinarily dire. To give you an example, in the battle for Mariupol, the Ukrainians were able to, they'd make strong points of these high-rise buildings. And the Russians, the tactic the Russians used was to assault the building because they had to inspect the base, make sure there were no civilians there. And then they'd fight floor by floor by floor, very bloody fighting. And the Ukrainians, even though they lost, they were giving the Russians a hard time. In Bakhmut, for example, the Russians are confirming that civilians have been evacuated, and the Ukrainians are putting a couple hundred guys into these high-rise buildings waiting for the Russians to come and fight floor by floor by floor. The Russians just pull back, hit it with a 2,000-pound bomb, drop the whole building, kill everybody. The Russians aren't playing the game anymore. They're not. The Russians are taking advantage of the fact that there is no air defense, and they're just holding back. They're just blowing everything up, killing everything. You can't even really call it combat. I mean, this is the ideal. Colin Powell once said, I don't believe in a fair fight. I don't want a fair fight. And the Russians right now, it ain't a fair fight.
He claims that you, McGregor, Crook, McGovern, Johnson, and I have all misread the documents that the boy is accused of leaking, and that, in fact, it is a 7-to-1 kill ratio the other way round, that the Ukrainians are killing 7 Russians for every 1 Ukrainian the Russians are killing. I have never heard this from anybody else. I wish we had the tape of it. Gary will get it for us the next time you're on with us. He's steadfast in that nonsense.
Look, Judge, I'm going to say it that I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm several thousand miles removed from the battlefield, and I'm a prisoner to the data that's made publicly available. I don't have secret information. I don't have the ability to pick up the phone. But what I do have is significant experience. And in things called military operations, combat, war. I respect Mr. Devine's background as a CIA operative. I really do. But he doesn't know anything about war, not a darn thing. And if he did, he would understand how ludicrous this concept of a 7-to-1 kill ratio and advantage for the Ukrainians is. It's just, I was going to use a bad word, not a bad word, but I was going to call him stupid. I would never call Jack Devine stupid, but it's stupid to say something like that. No one else. I mean, not even the Ukrainians will come up with that kind of fiction. And the Ukrainians are acknowledging that they're just getting butchered right now. They are. In the New York Times, which doesn't like Russia, they're starting to run stories about how bad it is. Everybody's starting to wake up because sooner, and it's going to be sooner rather than later, the Ukrainian army is going to collapse. And when they do, the whole truth is going to come out. There's a lot of people in the media right now saying, we need to start balancing the stories so that we don't have too much egg on our face.
And who's taking advantage of that but the Chinese? President Xi, who won't return Joe Biden's phone calls, will return a phone call from President Zelensky, and they'll talk for 90 minutes, and then they'll each have one of their PR people give a readout, and the readouts are remarkably similar and remarkably amicable. How's that, Joe Biden?
Well, Nixon went to China. Trump went to North Korea. Joe Biden hasn't done anything. I mean, diplomacy used to be America's forte. We used to be able to go out and at least try and engage. Camp David, we tried to solve the Israeli, we weren't successful, but at least we tried. Even Obama's Iran nuclear deal was an effort at diplomacy. We're in a very difficult world situation which demands leadership, and leadership out of the, I'm going to beat you up into a pulp even though I'm a skinny, atrophied old man type leadership. The leadership that says, I'm wise, I'm going to come in, I'm going to sit down, and we're going to solve this thing peacefully for the satisfaction of all parties. We're not doing it. A vacuum is being created. The Chinese are filling it. Peace is breaking out all over. Look at the Middle East, between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Look at the Middle East, between Saudi Arabia and Syria. And now China is coming in between Ukraine and Russia. They're taking advantage of the absolute lack of leadership on the part of the United States.
What is to prevent a ceasefire now, other than Joe Biden?
Look,
would Zelensky be assassinated? if he ordered a ceasefire and they repaired to Geneva and started negotiating?
But he could get in trouble if he did it on his own. But again, if I were the president of the United States, I'd just pick up the phone and say, we're done. It's over. No more equipment to you. I'm not going to let NATO send anything. It's a consensus-driven organization. We're shutting it down. Now, you can opt to fight on your own, Mr. Zelensky. That's your prerogative as a leader of a sovereign state. You won't get any help from us, and you'll die. Or if you accept the fact that it's over, we'll go ahead and help create the conditions to get the best possible result for you at the negotiating table. We will be on your side batting for you, but it's over. We're done. We're not going to have any more Ukrainians killed in our name. We're not going to waste any more money. The war's over. It would end that quick, but we're not doing it. So we're not doing it.
America has no off ramp, no soft landing to get out of this mess. $68 billion spent already. God only knows what else is committed. We know he's got another 35 or 40 billion available to him under the law. Terrible law, because the Constitution requires that every expenditure be recorded in a public journal. Tell that to the CIA and tell that to the DOD. Another argument for another time. But the Congress did give him $113 billion to spend however he wants. Is he foolish enough to spend all of it, or does he understand the principle of cutting your losses?
Well, he obviously understands the principle of cutting your losses. Look at Afghanistan. And the thing about America's geography is we have a built-in soft landing. It's called the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. So when we run away from a fight like we did in Afghanistan, like we did in South Vietnam, and like we're going to end up doing in Ukraine, we don't have to deal with the awful consequences of abandonment. We just leave. And then we go back to Fortress America or NATO or wherever. And the people that put everything on the line because they believe the United States, when the United States said, we're going to be there side by side fighting with you till the bitter end, they're left alone. Again, Afghanistan. That wasn't pretty what happened in August of 2021. That was an embarrassment. Kirby can get up there and spin it any way he wants. Everybody who watched that knew that this was a humiliation for America. But when we left, we didn't have to pay a price. We could just turn off TV and not see the images. The same thing's going to happen with Ukraine. When we leave, and we will leave, the Ukrainians are going to be left holding the bag all by themselves. The soft landing is Fortress America, buffered by the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans.